My name is Claire Morgan, and I was 28 years old when the weight of those words, only here for the money, first pressed itself against my chest like a stone. You'd think that after marrying someone, after standing hand in hand and vowing forever, the people who raised him would at least try to give me the benefit of the doubt. But with my in-laws, it was never that way. I met Daniel when I was 24, just starting to find my footing in the professional world. I had worked hard, really hard through college, juggling part-time jobs, taking night shifts, saving every penny I could to make sure I didn't drown in debt. By the time I graduated, I had secured a stable position in a finance firm, the kind of job that didn't make me rich overnight but gave me the assurance that if I worked smart, if I planned carefully, I could build a life that wasn't constantly teetering on the edge of collapse. Daniel was charming in ways I wasn't used to. He was kind, funny, always the one to notice when I seemed overwhelmed, always the one to pull me back into the moment when I got lost in my endless to-do lists. He worked in architecture, creative, passionate about design, but not the most financially stable career in the early years.
It didn't matter to me.
I wasn't looking for someone's wallet. I was looking for someone's heart. And with him, I thought I had found it. The first time I met his parents, though, there was a chill in the air I couldn't quite place. His mother, elegant and sharp-tongued, smiled in a way that felt rehearsed. His father, quiet but judgmental, asked questions that were less about knowing me and more about measuring me. "What does your family do?" he asked, eyes narrowing slightly when I admitted my parents were schoolteachers. "Oh," he said, as though the word itself carried a dismissal. I brushed it off then. Not every family is warm from the start, I told myself. Maybe they just needed time to see who I really was. But time didn't soften them. If anything, it hardened their view of me. Every family dinner was a gauntlet of subtle jabs. "Claire, you must love how Daniel spoils you," his mother would say, even though it was me covering most of our rent. "Architecture doesn't always pay well in the beginning, but I'm sure Claire likes the finer things," his father would add, smirking as though he'd uncovered some hidden truth. Daniel tried to defend me at first, but he was always torn. He wanted to please his parents, wanted their approval, and so his voice often faltered when it came to standing firmly beside me. That silence hurt more than their words. Behind closed doors, though, I was the one managing our finances. Daniel's projects were sporadic, payments delayed. There were months when his income was barely enough to cover his student loan payments, let alone groceries, utilities, or the looming mortgage his parents had insisted he take on after helping him find a house. They had pitched in for the down payment, but every monthly payment afterward? That was me. I cut corners, skipped vacations, took on extra freelance work at night, all so that our house, didn't fall into foreclosure. But his parents never saw that. They never asked. They had written a script in their heads, and in it, I was the woman bleeding their son dry. One evening, I remember sitting at that long mahogany dining table in their pristine home. His mother poured herself a glass of wine, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "I just hope you're with Daniel for the right reasons. Some women see potential and exploit it." I felt my stomach twist. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside me, muttering, "Mom, that's not fair." But his voice was too soft to cut through the sting. I wanted to scream, to tell her that while she was sipping her expensive Chardonnay, I was the one clocking late hours to make sure the bank didn't come knocking on her son's door. But I swallowed it. I always swallowed it, because I told myself the truth didn't need to be shouted. It would show itself eventually. Still, the weight of their judgment pressed heavier and heavier. Every smile I forced, every fake laugh at their jokes, chipped away at me. I began to wonder if Daniel saw it too. Did he, deep down, believe what they believed? Did he think I was only there because of what he might someday provide? The nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, those questions echoed louder than their words. And yet, every morning, I still got up, went to work, and made sure the bills were paid. Not for them, but for us, for the life I believed Daniel and I were building together. But betrayal doesn't always come in one explosive moment. Sometimes it's a slow leak, a drip of poison that you don't notice until it's too late. And as the months went on, that poison seeped deeper, not just into my relationship with his parents, but into my marriage itself. Because one night, when Daniel came home late, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. A phone call, his mother's voice faint through the speaker, and Daniel's words, hesitant, tired. "I know, Mom. I just don't want her to think I can't provide. But, yeah, she does cover most of it." My heart clenched. He had told them. Not only told them, but in a way that made me sound like I was pitying him, like I was keeping score. He had stripped away the sacrifices I made quietly and twisted them into something shameful. That was the night the cracks became fault lines. I wish I could say I confronted Daniel right then, stormed into the living room, demanded answers. But I didn't. I froze. My body felt heavy, like I was anchored to the spot, while my mind spun out of control. Hearing him confirm to his mother what she had always wanted to believe, without defending me, without giving context, was like being stabbed by someone I had opened my chest to willingly. I remember sitting on the edge of our bed after he hung up the phone, staring at the floor. The silence between us, when he finally walked into the room, was deafening. He didn't even know I had heard him. He smiled tiredly, kissed the top of my head, and mumbled something about being exhausted. But I couldn't sleep that night. I stared at his back, wondering if I was just another burden he carried, another thing he let his parents gossip about behind closed doors. The next morning, over coffee, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Do you ever tell your parents how much I contribute? Or do you just let them think I'm some leech?" Daniel blinked at me, surprised, almost defensive. "Where is this coming from?" "Where it's coming from," I said, gripping the mug so hard my knuckles whitened, "is the fact that they look at me like I'm a gold digger. Like I'm here for what you don't even have. And instead of correcting them, you let them believe it." He frowned, rubbing his temples. "Claire, you're overthinking. They don't mean it like that." I laughed bitterly. "No, Daniel, they mean it exactly like that. And you know it." He didn't answer, just stared at the floor. That silence told me everything I needed to know. After that, something shifted in me. I stopped bending over backward to make his parents comfortable. At dinners, I didn't force polite smiles anymore. I didn't entertain their backhanded comments. I sat quietly, answered only when necessary, and let them choke on their own smugness. If they wanted to think I was the villain, then fine, let them. But the part that cut the deepest was not their cruelty. It was Daniel's passivity. He wanted to live in the middle, to be the son who pleased his parents and the husband who didn't upset his wife. But in doing so, he betrayed me every single day. One evening, about 2 months later, I came home to find an envelope slipped halfway under the door. It was from the bank. My chest tightened as I tore it open. A mortgage statement. Late payment notice. I flipped through the pages in disbelief. I had scheduled that transfer like I always did. Then I realized Daniel had withdrawn money from our account. A large chunk. Enough to throw the payment off balance. When he got home, I was waiting. "Why did you take money from the account?" I asked, holding up the paper. He looked guilty, but tried to shrug it off. "I needed to cover some project expenses. I'll pay it back." "Project expenses?" I snapped. "Daniel, that money was for the mortgage. For the house. Do you even realize what could have happened?" His jaw tightened. "Claire," I said, "I'll pay it back. You don't have to treat me like a child." But that's exactly what it felt like. Me carrying the weight. Me juggling numbers late at night to make sure everything balanced, while he drifted between his parents' approval and his pride. That was when the words started echoing again. Gold digger. Only here for the money. And I thought, if only they knew. If only they had the faintest clue about the hours I've poured into holding this family together. Weeks turned into months, and the strain only grew heavier. I began to notice the way his parents would conveniently forget to include me in family plans. A barbecue invite would arrive addressed only to Daniel. Holiday plans would be whispered about between them when they thought I wasn't listening. And Daniel, oh, Daniel, would just shrug and say, "You know how they are." But one particular night was burned into my memory. It was his father's birthday dinner. We sat around their glossy dining table, candles flickering, wine glasses clinking. His mother leaned across the table, her smile thin, and said, "Daniel, we're so proud of you. You've done so well for yourself, building a life, buying a home. It must feel good to be the provider." Her eyes darted toward me, sharp, pointed. I waited for him to correct her. To say, "Actually, Mom, Claire's the one who makes sure the mortgage is paid every month." But he didn't. He just smiled, that weak, practiced smile, and nodded. I felt heat rising to my cheeks, my throat tightening. The laughter around the table blurred. The clinking of cutlery became a low roar in my ears. I wanted to stand up, slam my glass down, and shout the truth. But instead, I sat there in silence, feeling invisible in the very marriage I had built with my own 2 hands. Later that night, in the car, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Why didn't you say anything?" I demanded. Daniel sighed, gripping the steering wheel. "Because it's not worth the fight, Claire. You don't understand. They're set in their ways. Correcting them would just make things worse." I stared at him in disbelief. Worse than this? Worse than sitting there while they treat me like some parasite? He didn't answer. And that silence, oh, that silence became the sound of my heart breaking. After that night, I stopped waiting for him to defend me. I realized something important. People will treat you how you allow them to. And I had allowed his parents to trample over me because I kept hoping Daniel would eventually take my side. But he wouldn't. So I started planning quietly. Not revenge, not yet, but self-preservation. I made sure the mortgage payments came directly from my personal account, not our shared one. I kept records of every payment, every receipt. I even started building a file, a thick folder that proved exactly who had been carrying the weight of that house. Because a part of me knew one day the truth would need to come out. And as much as I hated to admit it, a darker part of me wanted to see the look on their faces when it did. One Sunday afternoon, his mother called me directly. That was unusual. She almost always spoke to Daniel. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but the venom underneath was sharp. "Claire," she said, "I just want to make sure you're taking good care of Daniel. He deserves someone who really values him, not just his stability." I gripped the phone so hard my hand ached. "Stability?" I echoed. "Yes," she said smoothly. "I know architecture isn't easy at first, but Daniel comes from strong roots. He'll always be fine." Some women just see that and attach themselves. It was like being slapped through the receiver. I wanted to laugh, scream, cry, all at once. But instead, I said evenly, "Don't worry, Mrs. Morgan. Daniel has been well taken care of." And I hung up. That night, as Daniel sat sketching at his desk, I pulled out the folder I had been compiling. I ran my hand over the thick stack of papers. The receipts, the bank transfers, the statements. Proof. Not for me. I already knew the truth. But for them. For the day they would finally push too far, and the curtain would be ripped back. Because no matter how long I had to wait, no matter how many dinners I had to sit through in silence, I knew this. One day, they would learn exactly who had been paying for the life they were so proud of. And when they did, it would not be me left ashamed. I remember waking up the morning after that dinner, my body still heavy with the weight of what had been said, like I hadn't slept at all. The words, "only here for the money," kept circling around in my head, repeating themselves in different tones, different variations, almost as if my brain was trying to torture me with the many ways those words could have been intended. Sometimes it sounded like mockery. Other times it was disgust. Then there were moments it turned into pure hatred, and in those moments, my chest ached so hard it felt like I couldn't breathe. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling both hollow and strangely sharp at the same time. Hollow because their judgment had carved a hole inside me. Sharp because anger had started filling that hole. Anger I didn't yet know what to do with. Ethan stirred beside me, his arm brushing against mine. For a moment, I almost turned toward him, almost let myself collapse into the safety of his chest, but then the memory of his silence at that dinner came rushing back. He hadn't defended me. He hadn't even said a single word to stop them. "Morning," he muttered groggily, his voice still rough with sleep. "Morning," I replied, my tone clipped. I hated that he noticed. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes. "You okay?" he asked. I wanted to scream, "No, I'm not okay, Ethan." Your family basically called me a gold digger in front of you, and you let them. You sat there and let me drown while they laughed and judged. But instead, all I said was, I'm fine. Because I didn't want to fight before work. Because part of me was still afraid of seeming too emotional. Isn't that the stereotype they always love to throw on women? I could already hear them whispering to him. See?
She's dramatic.
She can't handle criticism. But inside, my thoughts were anything but fine. As I dressed for work that morning, pulling on my fitted navy blazer, the one that made me feel just a little more invincible in the office, I kept thinking about the absurdity of it all. I was the one who worked 60-hour weeks at my firm, who had built my reputation client by client. I was the one who had walked into banks with folders full of paperwork, making sure the mortgage was approved. I was the one who made sure every single monthly payment went through on time, even during the months when Ethan's freelance projects dried up. I had carried us, but to them, I was only here for the money. That afternoon, at work, I caught myself staring out the window more than once. My assistant Mia noticed. You okay? She asked gently, handing me a coffee. I forced a smile. Just didn't sleep well. She nodded knowingly, not pressing further. She was good like that, knowing when not to ask questions. But as I sipped the coffee, my mind began to shift. Maybe it was the caffeine, maybe it was just time settling in, but I realized something important. Their words had cut me deeply, but they weren't the truth. The truth was that I wasn't the one dependent on anyone. I was the one holding everything together. Still, when I got home that night, the tension between Ethan and me was like a storm waiting to break. He was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with his phone in hand. Your mom texted me, he said flatly. I froze. Oh. He shrugged, still scrolling. She thinks you were being oversensitive last night. The words were like a slap. Oversensitive. I felt my jaw tighten. I set my bag down and crossed my arms. So that's what she said?
Yeah.
I don't know. She's old-fashioned. You know how she is. Old-fashioned. I repeated, my voice sharp now. Ethan, she insulted me. Your dad did too. They questioned my motives for marrying you. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? He finally looked up at me, his expression caught somewhere between guilt and defensiveness. I know. It wasn't right. But they don't mean it the way you think. I laughed bitterly. Really? Then please enlighten me. What exactly did they mean when they said I was only here for the money? His silence was answer enough. That night, we argued until our voices were hoarse. He kept trying to minimize it, as though brushing their cruelty under the rug would make it disappear. I kept demanding he acknowledge it for what it was, a direct attack on me, on my integrity, on our marriage. When he finally muttered, maybe you should just let it go, something inside me cracked. Let it go. As if my entire sense of worth in his family's eyes was just a minor inconvenience, something I should sweep aside for the sake of peace. I went to bed that night with tears in my eyes, but underneath those tears, something else was growing. Resolve. In the days that followed, I started pulling away. Not from Ethan completely, but from the illusion that everything between us was unshakable. I needed to protect myself, even if it meant creating some distance. I buried myself in work, stayed late at the office more often, and when I was home, I found excuses to avoid lingering in the same room too long. But silence has a way of amplifying truths, doesn't it? The more I pulled back, the more Ethan seemed to realize something was broken. He tried cooking dinner one night, pasta with too much garlic, but I barely touched it. He suggested a weekend trip, but I said I had deadlines. One evening, though, as I sat at the dining table balancing my laptop and a stack of documents, he finally sat across from me, his expression serious. Olivia, he began. His voice was quiet, steady in a way that caught my attention. You've been different lately. I didn't look up. I've been busy. That's not what I mean, he pressed. You're angry and distant. And I get it, okay? What they said was wrong. I should have said something. I should have defended you. The sound of those words, I should have defended you, was both relieving and devastating. Relieving because finally he admitted it. Devastating because it took this long for him to see it. I closed my laptop slowly, my eyes locking on his. Do you mean that? Or are you just saying it because you feel guilty? He leaned forward. I mean it.
I've been thinking about it nonstop. And you're right.
They had no right to say that. You've given more to this marriage, to this house, than anyone. I should have told them right then and there. For a moment, my chest softened. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that his loyalty, his love, could outweigh their venom. But then I remembered something else. His silence at that dinner wasn't just about that moment. It was about every moment before, all the times his family had made sly comments or subtle jabs, and he had let them slide. It was about a pattern I had ignored because I loved him too much to see it clearly. I sighed, my voice quieter now. Ethan, it's not just about what they said. It's about you letting them say it. Do you know how small I felt sitting there, waiting for you to speak up, and you never did? His face crumpled slightly, like he was realizing the depth of what had been broken. He reached for my hand across the table, but I hesitated before letting him take it. I don't want to lose you, he whispered. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted. Not just between us, but inside me. Because I realized I wasn't powerless in this story. I wasn't some fragile woman clinging to her husband's family's approval. I was the one paying the mortgage. I was the one who had built my life, my career, my independence. The real question wasn't whether his family thought I was here for the money. The real question was whether Ethan and I were strong enough to rebuild the trust they had shattered. And deep down, a part of me wondered if the answer was already written. The following weeks stretched out like an endless test of patience, one I wasn't sure I was passing. On the surface, Ethan and I continued with the routines of married life. Work, meals, small conversations, but under the surface, something vital had cracked. I felt it every time I glanced at him and remembered that dinner table, remembered his silence. It was like a shadow always at the edge of my vision. And then came the invitations. His mother seemed to think everything could be smoothed over with constant family dinners, brunches, Sunday get-togethers. As if the cure for her cruelty was my presence at her table again and again. One evening, Ethan waved an envelope at me as I was folding laundry. Mom's planning a family barbecue this Saturday. She really wants us there. I didn't even look up. I have work. You've worked every weekend for the past month, he said, his voice edging toward frustration. Maybe that tells you something? I shot back, finally meeting his eyes. He sighed, tossing the envelope onto the coffee table. Liv, avoiding them isn't going to fix anything. They're still my parents. The laundry in my hands suddenly felt heavier. And I'm still your wife. Do I not matter as much? The silence between us was deafening. For a moment, I thought he would argue, but instead, he just rubbed his forehead like he was too tired to fight. That Saturday, I stayed home, claiming I had reports to finish, while Ethan went without me. The hours dragged on, and though I busied myself with cleaning and emails, my mind kept wandering. I wondered if they were talking about me. No, I knew they were. The thought of them laughing in their backyard, tossing casual remarks about the gold-digging wife who thinks she's too good for family dinners, made my stomach twist. When Ethan returned that evening, the look on his face told me everything. They asked about you, he said quietly, dropping his keys into the bowl by the door. I'm sure they did, I replied, not bothering to hide my bitterness. They don't understand why you're like this. Like what? I demanded, slamming the dishwasher shut harder than necessary. He hesitated, then said, so defensive, so distant. I laughed, sharp, humorless. Defensive? Ethan, I'm defending myself from people who think my entire existence in this marriage is based on stealing from you. Do you hear yourself? He winced, but before he could reply, my phone buzzed on the counter. A message from his sister lit up the screen. If you can't handle being part of this family, maybe you shouldn't be in it at all. I felt the blood drain from my face. Slowly, I turned the phone toward Ethan. This is what your family thinks of me. And you want me to sit at their table and smile? He looked at the message, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like he didn't know where to start. Finally, he whispered, I'll talk to her. But something in me broke then. Because I realized his talking wouldn't change a thing. Words were cheap in his family. They tossed them like darts and then laughed when they landed in someone's skin. That night, lying awake, I stared at the ceiling and thought about everything I had sacrificed. The long nights at the office, the paychecks that went straight into our joint account, the years of pushing myself harder and harder so we could have this house, this life. I thought about the mortgage statements with my name on them, the bank transfers I scheduled, the times I'd cut back on things I wanted just to make sure we never fell behind. And then I thought about them calling me a parasite. The anger that rose in me then wasn't the sharp sting I'd felt before. It was something deeper, steadier, like a fire catching hold in my chest. I realized I didn't want to just endure anymore. I wanted them to know. I wanted them to see, with their own eyes, exactly who was carrying the weight of this marriage, this house, this so-called stability they loved to credit Ethan for. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. 2 weeks later, Ethan's parents invited us again, this time for his father's birthday dinner. I almost said no. Every cell in my body wanted to say no. But then I thought about that message from his sister, about his mother's smug smile, about the way they dismissed me, as if I were disposable. And I decided, no, this time I'd go. When Ethan told me he was relieved I'd agreed, I didn't correct him. I didn't tell him the truth, that I wasn't going to mend fences. I was going to burn down the illusion they'd built about me. That evening, I dressed carefully, not overly glamorous, not too casual. Just sharp. A fitted black dress, modest but commanding, paired with a blazer that matched the one I wore to my biggest client presentations. The kind of outfit that said, I'm not here to play small. As we drove to his parents' house, Ethan glanced at me a few times, almost nervously. Thank you for coming, he murmured. I only nodded, keeping my thoughts to myself. Dinner was predictably suffocating. His mother greeted me with a smile too tight. His father's handshake lingered just a second too long, as if testing whether I'd crack under his gaze. The food was good, but the atmosphere was poison. Every word laced with undertones I couldn't ignore. Finally, somewhere between the roast and dessert, his father leaned back and said, So, Olivia, how's work? Still busy, I imagine. The way he said it, like busy was code for something else, made my blood boil. Yes, I said evenly, meeting his eyes. Busy enough that sometimes I wonder how I keep up with the mortgage payments. The table went silent. His sister frowned, his mother's fork froze midair, and Ethan looked at me in alarm. What do you mean? His father asked, his tone sharp now. I set my wine glass down carefully, my heart pounding but my voice steady. I mean that I've been paying the mortgage. Every month. Since the beginning. Out of my salary. Out of the hours I put in at the firm. This house? The one you all love gathering in? It's standing because of me. His sister scoffed. That's not true. Check the bank records, I said calmly. Check the transfers. Every payment has my name on it. Ethan's face was pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table. His parents looked at each other, their smug expressions faltering for the first time. I leaned forward slightly. So the next time you want to call me a gold digger or say I'm only here for the money, maybe remember this. Without me, there wouldn't be a house for you to insult me in. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. No one moved, no one spoke. And in that silence, for the first time in months, I felt powerful again. I excused myself from the table then, my appetite gone, and walked into the night air outside. The stars above were sharp and cold, but the air in my lungs felt cleaner than it had in weeks. Inside, I heard muffled voices, Ethan's low and urgent, his mother's shrill and defensive, his father's gruff. But I didn't care what they were saying. For once, I had spoken my truth, and they couldn't unhear it. But as I stood on their porch, staring out into the darkness, another truth settled over me. Exposing them had felt good, but it hadn't fixed anything. The fracture in my marriage, the distance growing between Ethan and me, the constant ache of not being believed until I forced them to, those wounds were still raw, still bleeding. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The drive home from that dinner was the longest silence I'd ever endured with Ethan. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tightly I could hear the faint grind of his teeth. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, replaying the words I had spoken over and over again. Each sentence still rang in my ears, sharp and unapologetic. For the first time in months, I hadn't swallowed my pride, hadn't folded myself smaller to fit into their warped version of me. I had said it, out loud. And yet, beneath the satisfaction, there was a gnawing dread. I knew there would be consequences. When we finally pulled into our driveway, Ethan killed the engine but didn't move. The silence inside the car was suffocating. I couldn't take it anymore. "Say something," I whispered. He exhaled hard through his nose, finally turning to me. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice wasn't angry, it was hurt, almost betrayed. I blinked. "Tell you what? That I've been paying the mortgage? That I've been keeping this house afloat while your family sat around calling me a gold digger?" "Yes," he said, his tone rising. "That. You made me look like a fool in front of them. Like I didn't even know what was happening in my own house." I stared at him, disbelief flooding my chest. "Ethan, I've been begging you to stand up for me for months. I've been waiting for you to see me. You didn't. So I had to show them. Do you understand what that feels like? To be accused, insulted, dismissed, and the one person who should have had my back sat there in silence." His face crumpled slightly, but he shook his head. I thought things were fine. You never said." "I did." I cut in, my voice cracking. "You just didn't want to hear it." He looked away, his hands tightening on the wheel even though the car was already off. The streetlight outside cast harsh shadows across his profile, making him look older, weary. "I don't know how we fix this," he said finally, his voice low. For the first time since this all began, I didn't rush to reassure him. I didn't reach out, didn't soften my tone, didn't fold myself smaller. "Maybe we don't," I whispered. And with that, I pushed open the car door and went inside, leaving him alone in the dark. The following days were heavy with unspoken words. Ethan moved around the house like a ghost, quieter than usual, more careful with what he said. I buried myself in work, staying late at the office just to avoid the tension at home. At night, we lay side by side in bed, the space between us feeling like a canyon that neither of us dared to cross. And then the letters started coming. The first one arrived in a cream-colored envelope with no return address. Inside was a note, handwritten in neat cursive. "No matter what you do, you'll never be one of us." I froze when I read it, my fingers trembling. I showed Ethan, who frowned and said, "Probably just a prank." But I knew it wasn't. 2 days later, another came. "Money doesn't buy love. Ethan will see that eventually." This time, I didn't even show him. What was the point? He would brush it off again, and I'd be left holding the weight of their venom alone. But the notes kept coming. Little reminders slipped into my mailbox, slipped under the windshield wiper of my car, tucked into the crack of our front door. Each one a dagger. Each one dripping with the same message. I wasn't welcome. At first, I burned them, tossed them into the fireplace, and watched the flames eat the paper, convincing myself that fire could erase the sting. But after the 5th one, I started keeping them, tucking them into a drawer in my office. Not because I wanted the reminders, but because part of me knew I might need proof one day. The breaking point came one Sunday afternoon. Ethan had gone to visit his parents again. I'd refused, saying I needed to catch up on work. When he returned, his face was pale, his jaw tight. "What happened?" I asked, wary. He dropped heavily into a chair. "They said you embarrassed them, that you made them look like freeloaders in their own home." I laughed bitterly. "That's rich." He rubbed his face, groaning. "Olivia, I'm caught in the middle here. I love you, but I love them too. I don't know how to choose." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Choose," I repeated. "This isn't about choosing, Ethan. This is about right and wrong. This is about you standing up for your wife when she's being slandered. Do you even hear yourself? Caught in the middle? No, you're hiding in the middle because it's easier than admitting they're wrong." His eyes flashed with anger, but underneath, I saw the truth. He was hiding. And worse, he didn't know how to stop. That night, lying in bed, I made a decision. I couldn't keep waiting for Ethan to save me. I couldn't keep hoping his parents would magically wake up one day and realize the depth of their cruelty. If they wanted to see who I really was, if they wanted proof of what I brought to this marriage, then I would give it to them. Not with words, not with arguments that fell on deaf ears, but with something undeniable. Something that would strip away every lie they'd told themselves about me. And maybe, just maybe, show Ethan the truth too. The next morning, I woke early and sat at my desk, pulling out the folder I kept for our finances. Bank statements, mortgage records, tax documents, all of it was there, meticulously organized. I laid them out in front of me, running my fingers over the numbers, the dates, the hard evidence of every sacrifice I'd made. As I stared at those papers, the plan began to form. Not revenge, not exactly. Something bigger. Something permanent. For months, they had called me a parasite, a gold digger, a woman who only married for money. But what would they say when they learned the house they gathered in every holiday, the roof over Ethan's head, the ground beneath their feet? It all existed because of me. And what would Ethan do when he realized the truth wasn't just a detail I had forgotten to mention, but the foundation of our entire life together? The fire in my chest burned hotter than ever as I stacked the papers neatly, sliding them into a sleek leather folder. They wanted to test me? Fine. It was time they learned the cost of underestimating me. I sat in the car for almost 10 minutes after pulling into my driveway, hands still gripping the steering wheel as if it were the only thing tethering me to the earth. The radio was off, the house looked still, and for a moment I allowed myself to imagine what life might have been like if things hadn't spiraled so far out of control. A husband who didn't gamble, a family who didn't turn against me, a sister who wasn't scheming in the shadows. But that fantasy dissolved quickly as reality came rushing back, cold and merciless. The front door creaked open before I even stepped out. My neighbor, Mrs. Henley, shuffled down her porch steps with a cautious smile. She was in her late 60s, always knitting, always watching. "I saw your sister here earlier," she said casually, as if she were telling me about the weather. "She was knocking on your door for a while, then left something in the mailbox." A chill ran through me. I forced a polite nod, muttering thanks, but my legs felt like stone as I walked toward the mailbox. Inside was a single white envelope. No name on the front. No return address. I didn't open it right away. My fingers trembled as I slid it into my purse and hurried inside, locking the door behind me. When I finally tore it open, a photograph slipped out. My stomach dropped. It was a picture of me, taken just yesterday, standing in the grocery store parking lot while I loaded bags into my car. On the back, in thick black ink, were the words, "We're always watching." I sat on the kitchen floor, clutching that photo until my knuckles turned white. Who was we? My sister? My husband's old poker buddies? Or someone else entirely? The paranoia dug into me, sharper than any knife. Every creak of the house, every shadow outside the window made me flinch. That night, I barely slept. I kept the lights on, every room glowing like a stage, daring whoever was watching to show themselves. But no one came. By dawn, exhaustion tugged at my body, yet my mind burned with determination. If they wanted me scared, they were succeeding. But I couldn't let fear paralyze me. I took the photo and envelope to a private investigator, a man named Frank Dalton who ran a small office downtown that smelled of stale coffee and old cigarette smoke. He was rough around the edges, late 50s, with a skeptical glare that could cut through steel. "You sure you're not just dealing with a prank?" he asked after examining the photo. "I'm sure," I said firmly. "My sister's been trying to ruin me. My husband disappeared into debt. And now this. I need answers." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "All right, I'll see what I can dig up. But if someone's tailing you, you'll need to be careful. More careful than you've ever been." The word careful echoed in my head for the rest of the day. I kept glancing over my shoulder, checking mirrors, waiting for the feeling of eyes on me to materialize into something tangible. But nothing did. 2 days later, Frank called me. His voice was graver than before. "I don't know how to tell you this," he said, "but the camera footage I reviewed from the grocery store shows your sister handing a wad of cash to a man in a gray hoodie. Minutes later, that man snapped the photo of you." My chest constricted, heat rising behind my eyes. "So she is behind it," I whispered. "Looks that way. But that's not all." His voice dropped lower. "The man in the hoodie? He's not just anyone. He's got priors, assault, intimidation, extortion. If she's paying him, this isn't going to stop at just photographs." I felt sick. My sister wasn't just trying to embarrass me. She was playing with dangerous fire, and she wanted me burned alive in the process. That evening, as I sat at my desk piecing together the timeline, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A distorted male voice hissed through the line. "You think you're clever? Stay out of your sister's way, or next time, it won't just be pictures." The line went dead before I could respond. My whole body went cold. I locked every door and window, double-checking them twice. I wanted to call the police, but what would I even say? That my sister hired a thug to scare me? They'd laugh me out of the station without proof. The next morning, Frank called again. I traced the cash. She withdrew it from a joint account, the one tied to your husband's old debts. Which means she's not just targeting you. She's cleaning house. Cleaning house. The phrase made me shiver. She wasn't just out to hurt me. She wanted to erase me entirely from the family's financial picture. My home, my job, my very place in the world gone. I tried to confront her. I drove to her place, rehearsing a dozen speeches in my head, but when I knocked, no one answered. The blinds were drawn, the driveway empty. Only when I turned to leave did I notice a new security camera mounted above her door, its black lens staring right at me like a watchful eye. By the time I got home, there was another envelope waiting. This time it wasn't a photo, it was a single key. Old, tarnished, with no explanation. Attached was a sticky note. "You'll need this soon." My hands shook as I held it up to the light. A key to what? A locker? A storage unit? A trap? I couldn't tell. But I knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. Whatever door this key opened, it was the next step in my sister's twisted game. And if I turned it in the wrong lock, I might not come back out alive. When the lawyer finished his statement, the silence that filled the room was heavier than anything I had ever experienced. You could practically hear the weight of truth settling onto my in-laws' shoulders, pressing them down into the cushions of their expensive leather chairs. For so long, I had felt like the outsider, the one who needed to justify her worth, to prove again and again that I wasn't just some gold digger looking to enjoy the fruits of someone else's labor. But in that moment, the truth shattered the lie they had been clinging to for years. I wasn't there for the money. I was the money. My father-in-law's jaw clenched, the lines in his face deepening as though carved by shame. My mother-in-law's hands trembled, and she finally broke the silence with a whisper that carried both disbelief and something I couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe. "You paid it all? The mortgage? All of it?" I didn't flinch. I didn't soften. For once, I didn't feel like I owed them kindness. "Yes," I said. My voice was steady, stronger than it had ever been in their presence. "Every single payment. From the very first month until the last. While you looked me in the eyes and called me worthless, I was keeping the roof over your son's head. Over all of our heads." The words hung in the air like an indictment. I had spent so many years silencing myself to keep the peace, biting my tongue when they mocked me, enduring their coldness for the sake of family. But that era was over. My husband, Michael, looked at me then with an expression I'll never forget, part awe, part guilt, and something like relief. He had known, of course. He knew I was the one making the payments, carrying the burdens so he could focus on rebuilding his career after losing his job. But I think he had underestimated the toll it took on me, carrying not just the financial weight, but also the emotional scars of their constant insults. He reached for my hand under the table, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt powerful. The lawyer cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. Mrs. Thompson has indeed been the sole contributor to the mortgage. All documents verify this. Given that the property is now fully paid, the deed will be adjusted accordingly. And there it was, the final nail in the coffin of their narrative. Not only had I paid for the house, but legally, the home would bear my name. The irony was delicious. The same people who accused me of marrying for money were now confronted with the reality that if it weren't for me, they would still be burdened with debt. My sister-in-law, who had always followed her parents' lead in treating me like an unwelcome guest, suddenly found her voice. So what? You think this changes anything? You'll always be the girl who wasn't good enough. Money doesn't buy you respect. I turned to her, calm, almost eerily so. No, I said softly. Respect is earned. And while you were too busy judging me, I was building the foundation you all stand on. Maybe you'll never respect me, but you will never be able to erase what I've done. And that's enough for me. The younger version of me, the one who used to cry in secret after every family gathering, who longed desperately for their acceptance, would have broken down in that moment. She would have begged for understanding, for love, for recognition. But I wasn't her anymore. I had grown into someone stronger, someone who understood that validation from people who refuse to see your worth is worthless. After that night, things changed. They didn't change overnight, of course. Years of resentment and prejudice don't dissolve with a single revelation. But something shifted. The next time I visited their house, the comment stopped. No more digs about my place in the family, no more snide remarks about money. They weren't warm, not by any means, but the silence was better than the hostility. Michael, too, seemed to finally understand what I had endured. He apologized not once, but many times. He admitted he should have defended me more, should have shielded me from their cruelty. For the first time, we had real conversations about what it meant to be partners, about how heavy it had been to carry everything alone. I won't pretend it was easy. Forgiveness wasn't instant, and some wounds will always ache if pressed too hard. But there was healing in the truth finally being acknowledged, healing in no longer having to live under the weight of their lies. One day, months later, my mother-in-law called me. It was unexpected. She rarely called unless it was to relay some family obligation. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. "I didn't know," she said simply. "I didn't know how much you sacrificed. I'm sorry." It wasn't a grand apology. It didn't erase the years of hurt. But it was something. And sometimes, something is enough to start letting go of bitterness. Looking back now, at 32, I realize that this story isn't just about betrayal or revenge. It's about resilience. It's about standing tall when others try to cut you down. It's about knowing your own worth even when those around you refuse to see it. To anyone who has ever been underestimated, mocked, or told you weren't enough, remember this. Your value doesn't come from their approval. It comes from what you know in your heart to be true about yourself. People can twist narratives, but the truth has a way of rising. They called me greedy. They called me worthless. They said I was only here for the money. But in the end, when the papers were signed and the house was ours, it was my name that secured that future. It was my sacrifices that built that home. And I'll never let anyone make me feel small for that again. Because the truth is, I was never there for the money. I was there for love, for family, for the life we were building. But if money was the only language they understood, then fine. Let the truth be written in numbers, payments, and deeds. They wanted to know who paid the price? The answer will forever be me. And that is my story.